Okay, good afternoon, students. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everything is going well. So if you're ready, I'm going to start my lecture on the second chapter on American civilization. This is Dr. Ja talking to you. I hope all of you are around. Good afternoon, students. So please get ready. And if you have questions, as usual, it's going to be on the comments. All right? You share all your questions on the comments, and I will be able to see them. And I will pick them and answer all your questions. So number one thing is concentrate on the lecture. Try to take notes as much as possible. And then I will go slowly and let you know what we have to do. So I trust you can see my screen. So this is a continuation of my lecture. You have American Civilization, Chapter 2. And if you remember in Chapter 1, I dealt with exploration and discovery of America. I'm not going to be very long with that. You already read a lot of things about the discovery of America, who discovered America, and the debates over the discovery of America. Many people believe it is Christopher Columbus who discovered America. I told you this version of history has been challenged by so many American historians. In American history, it's not Christopher Columbus who first discovered America. America was discovered during the Viking Age. If you date it back to the explorations of Eric the Red and Leif Erikson. So Leif Erikson is credited to be the one who discovered it. So now in chapter 2, and then I dealt a little bit with colonialism, how European superpowers left Europe because there was a competition between France and Spain and England. France, Spain, and England. As I told you, until now, I'm not going to use the name United States of America because I told you we have to be very careful. This name came after independence. At the time of colonization, it means in the pre-Columbian and the Columbian era, we talk about America simply to avoid confusions. Now I've been done with chapter 1, I'm moving to chapter 2. All right? And chapter 2 has some objectives. One of the objectives of chapter 2 is to help you understand life and rule in colonial America. And second, it helps you familiarize with the history of the original 13 colonies. I will tell you the 13 colonies that would later become the 13 states of America. And here you need to familiarize with the way of life, the mode of government, the rule, and also familiarize with the history of the original 13 colonies. At this moment of American history, you need to know the 13 original colonies and be able to know what they are and what characterized these colonies and how the colonies were organized. This chapter helps you also understand the subdivision of the colonies. The colonies were divided into groups, and it is important for you to know the groups. And you have to familiarize with some key events that led to the American Revolution. You need to know what is the American Revolution and what are the causes of the American Revolution. And what was the result of the American Revolution. And the last objective is this chapter helps you know the different groups of people that marked the history of America during the colonial period. When you know all these things, it's okay. And I want to profit from this to inform you that soon you will start having your test, what they call control continue. And I'm going to evaluate you on the basis of chapter 1 and chapter 2 for your evaluation, for what you call devoir. But for the final exam, I will ask you questions on everything. But here, for the control, just focus on chapter 1 and chapter 2. I will evaluate you on chapter 1 and chapter 2. So let us go. Now we deal with life and government. Life and government during colonial America. Here you need to understand how colonies were governed or ruled and the way of life that dominated this period of history. So after exploration, so you see that within a century and a half, it means just 150 years, the British had established 13 flourishing colonies that they set along the east coast of America. So what does it mean? So over 150 years of occupation, exploration, the British people have been able to settle 13 colonies. And these colonies were established on the east coast of America. And you have to understand that until now, we cannot talk about states. It is the 13 original colonies that will, after their independence, declare themselves as independent colonies, and they will become a state, and they will become a union of 13 states. So the transition is from 13 colonies to 13 states. What is important to notice here is that familiarize with the list of the 13 original colonies. If I ask you to give me the list of the 13 original colonies, here they are: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. These are the 13 original colonies of America. You have to know them. And later in my developments, you will see how they are organized. The colonies were organized in terms of groups. And this organization tells you about their characteristics and what were the features of each colony. So just to simplify things, understand that when the British arrived and they occupied America, they established 13 colonies. And these colonies are here: Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. So you will see that these colonies had some things in common. It means there are some things that are the same in the colony. They can be divided in three groups, and each had a certain way of life. What does it mean? The 13 colonies had their own way of life. Some of them have the same way of life as others, but these colonies can be divided into three groups, and each one had a certain way of life. Is that correct? It's fine for you. So I start with the first group. The first group of colonies you need to familiarize with is the New England colonies. The New England colonies. So the New England colonies are, or I can tell you that the colonies were made of the colonies of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. If I ask you to tell me what group does Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island belong to, tell me they belong to the New England colonies. Or if I ask a question telling that what are the New England colonies, tell me the New England colonies are Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. Now let me tell you about how the New England colonies were organized. The New England colonies were flat along the rocky coastline, which made good harbors. It became hilly and mountainous further inland. What does it mean? It means that here the land was flat on the rocky coastline. Rocky, c'est rocher. Flat, it means in French, plat. Okay, so which made it good harbors because these colonies were on the coastline. C'est sur la côte maritime. All right, they were on the coastline. That's why it was very important and it was an opportunity to make a lot of harbors. What are harbors? Ce sont des quais, ce sont des ports maritimes. All right, so it became hilly and mountainous further inland. So it means if you go further, it becomes hilly with what you call colline, and mountainous, montagne. So the New England colonies had very harsh winters and mild summers. If I tell you about the climate, what does it mean? Harsh winter. Winter means hiver. It means it was very, very cold, very cold. And the summer means été in French. The summer were very mild. So it means in summer it's not very hot. It's not very hot. But the winter season, when it gets very cold, it is extremely very cold. So here, try to familiarize with the climate conditions. In terms of climate conditions, the New England colonies were characterized by harsh winters. Ils avaient des hivers très durs, but the summer were mild. So this made the growing season only about 5 months. So what was the impact of the climate on this? So you see that people had to grow. They have to develop agriculture to survive. And you realize that here, with agriculture, they could only do it for 5 months. Why 5 months? In Senegal, you see people growing at any season. Here, it was not possible. Why? It's because of the harsh winters. The winters were very harsh, so they were not able to grow at any season. They could only do that for 5 months. So, and what else? Because the soil was rocky, okay, and the climate was often harsh, colonists, what does it mean? It means inhabitants of the colony. Colonists comes from colony, so it means those who lived in colonies, so the inhabitants of the colonies. So I can simply say the inhabitants of the colonies of New England only farmed enough to feed their families. What does this mean? The soil was not that interesting. The soil was very rocky. It means rocheux. Il y avait trop de pierres et de roches. All right? And the climate was not that good. So the inhabitants of the New England colonies could only farm enough for their families. So it means what they were cultivating, what they were growing was only sufficient for their families. It could not be used for a lot of business. All right, that was the reality. And next is some of the crops. What does corn mean in French? It means maïs. And beans, vous connaissez, c'est les haricots. So the types of crops, c'est les cultures. The types of crops that were developed in New England were corn and beans. And else, what else? The New England colonies were full of forests. So here you will see that the nature was very dense. There were big forests. Until now, America is characterized by big forests. So what was the advantage of the big forests? It gave the inhabitants of the colonies important natural resources. It means trees. You know where there are so many trees, there are natural resources. So the New England colonies were characterized by big forests. And the advantage of the big forest was to give the inhabitants of the colonies or the colonialists important natural resources. And this was the trees. What was the advantage? These trees, they used the trees to provide wood, le bois. You see, even in Senegal, a lot of wood is coming from the Casamance. We don't have it in my area from the Fouta or other. We don't have these woods that people use. So here, from the forest, they could make wood that colonialists were able to use to build homes, buildings, and ships. So the natural resources with the forest, they could build homes. You go to the United States, many houses, homes are built or are made of wood. And also they could do buildings, and also they could build ships, les bateaux, or pirogues or canoes. So I repeat, one characteristic of the New England colonies is you find the presence of natural resources, big forests, and people could use these forests the trees to make wood. And they use the wood to build homes, buildings, and ships. In terms of land, the soil was rocky. So it means they could not do much with it. And the climate was very difficult, which made it that they could only farm enough to feed. They could not do a lot of agriculture because of the climate conditions and the situation of the soil, the land. And the types of crops they developed were corn and beans. What else? Because the New England colonies were along the coast, it means next to the ocean. Next to the ocean. Many colonialists were fishing. All right? So fishing also is or was a good activity. Why? Because the New England colonies were along the coast. C'était au long de la, comment dirais-je, c'est sur le littoral. All right? So because of the New England colonies were along the coast, that was a good opportunity. Many inhabitants of the colonies or colonialists were fishing. So they used to fish. This means that the fishing industry was very well developed. And the fishing industry, what did they fish? Most of them used to fish to do whaling. What does whaling mean? Whaling means la chasse aux baleines. Okay, la chasse aux baleines. So it means they were looking for whales. They were hunting whales. You know, the whale is characterized to be a fish, but it's a big animal in the water. And there were other types of fishing. They could go and take small fishes or big fishes, but whaling was one major activity. Let us talk about life. Life in New England was also characterized by the presence of the Puritans. So in New England, you see that the Puritans were there. So the colonies of New England were marked by the presence of the Puritans. I told you last time, who are the Puritans? The Puritans are religious people. The Puritans are religious people. The Puritans worked very hard and they were very serious. If today America is a big country, a very respected country, a country that has values, people who believe in work, people who believe in God, it's because the Puritans did a good job. The Puritans were very present in New England. So, in the New England colonies, life was marked by the presence of the Puritans. Who are the Puritans? Let me tell you. They are people who worked very hard and very seriously. They would not have parties. Puritans do not believe in parties. They don't do parties. Puritans are very religious people. They would not either play music. They don't play music. They don't celebrate holidays. If you compare Puritans and our ordinary life, you would just compare them with the Ibadu. We will just compare them with the Ibadu in our natural life. So the Puritans were these kind of people, very religious. They do not, play music. They don't celebrate holidays, and their way of life was very simple. They believed in living plainly. It means simple clothes. They used to put on simple clothes. They put simple clothes and homes. So, what characterized life with the Puritans? It was simplicity. Simplicity. Simplicity was the lifestyle of Puritans. Puritans believed in simplicity, only believing in God and working hard. That's why, remember, you see Americans say, in God we trust. All right? So feel free to post your questions. I'm looking at the chat to see what is going there. So the Puritans, they went to church often and created their villages around the meeting house where they held church meetings and school. There were people who were very, you know, um, intelligent. They were educated, high-ranking intellectuals. They practiced religion. So what did they do? They created villages around the meeting house, and the meeting house is where they held church, church service, where they held their meetings, and also school for education. So some free white men who owned property were allowed to vote. What does it mean? So the bourgeois, the high-ranking white people were the bourgeois. They are those who had title, who could represent in terms of government. They are in the leadership. They were the leaders, and they were representing the people. That was New England. I told you about New England. I moved to the second group, the middle colonies. The middle colonies. What are the middle colonies? The middle colonies are composed of Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. Here again, if I ask you to what colony, group of colonies, do Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania belong to? Tell me it is a middle colonies. Or if I ask you another question like, what colonies compose the middle colonies? Tell me it is Delaware, New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. So now let us talk about life in the middle colonies. The middle colonies tended to mix aspects of the New England and Southern colonies. Here, what does it mean? It means the middle colonies, their way of life was a kind of brassage, mixture, combination of lifestyle in New England colonies, and lifestyle in Southern colonies. So it means they were not very particular. They combine. It's just like when I say, what does life look like in Dakar? Dakar is a big town. Everybody comes from a different area. So the lifestyle in Dakar, in Senegal, is different because Dakar is a mixed population of everyone coming from everywhere. So the middle colonies tried to copy some aspect of life of New England colonies with some aspect of life of Southern colonies. So land holding were generally farms of 40 to 160 acres owned by families that worked them. So you see that in the middle colonies, agriculture was present. because people were owning land, big surfaces. So, and these families that had those, this land, they used to work them to exploit the land, to develop agriculture. And another issue is that slavery was especially common in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and New York in the 18th century, though fewer worked in agriculture. So what does it mean? Even though agriculture was not, very much developed, so Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York were characterized by the presence of slavery. You learned it in history. United States at a certain moment was characterized by slavery. So in these colonies, all right, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York in the 18th century, it was present there. Though fewer worked in agriculture. Yes, it means that maybe the slave, very few of them worked in agriculture, but it was present. Look at here, there is a comparison saying that unlike New England, the middle colonies had richer, less rocky soil. What does it mean? I told you that New England had a rocky soil, okay? Il y avait beaucoup de roches. So it was different from the middle colonies. So the middle colonies, their chance or their opportunity was that their land was very rich. It's different from the soil of New England colonies. And their soil was less rocky. So it means this is a good advantage. So it means the land was prosperous. So this allowed the area to become the major exporter of wheat and grains. Wheat means blé. So they were, as they had a richer land, and a less rocky soil, they were able to exploit and to produce a lot of wheat, c'est le blé, and grains, c'est des céréales. So each large export led to its constituent colonies becoming known as a breadbasket colonies. So thanks to this advantage, okay, the middle colonies were referred to as a breadbasket colonies. What does a breadbasket colonies mean? It means le grenier. Take the case of Senegal. Senegal produces a lot of peanuts. Senegal produces a lot of peanuts. So where are the peanuts produced? So most of the peanuts are produced in Kaolack and Fatick because that's what we call the bassin arachidier. Why do you call it the bassin arachidier? Yes, it's because they propose a lot of peanuts. They develop a lot of peanuts. So they grow a lot of peanuts from here in Senegal, in the context of Senegal. That's why Kaolack and the other things are called le bassin arachidier. A lot of peanuts come from there. So in New England, in the history of America, the middle colonies were called the breadbasket colonies. It's because a lot of things came from the middle colonies. They were good exporters of wheat and other grains. So Pennsylvania became the leading exporter of wheat, corn, hemp. Hemp means chanvre, and flax, c'est le lin. So Pennsylvania was a big producer of wheat, corn, hemp, chanvre, and flax. So this made it the leading food producer in North America from 1725 to 1840s. So you see what was the opportunity of the middle colonies. The land was pretty good. It was rich and less rocky. So they could cultivate, they could do a lot of things. That's why the middle colonies produced a lot of things, and the middle colonies was referred to as a breadbasket, c'est le grenier. Everything almost came from there. And Pennsylvania became a leading export of wheat, corn, hemp, and flax. And this position made Pennsylvania to be the leading food producer in North America. So it means in North America from 1725 to 1840, they produce a lot of things. So the middle colonies were ethnically diverse. British colonies, the most ethnically diverse British colonies in North America. What does this mean? This means simply that in terms of population, the middle colonies were mixed and diverse. It's just like the population of Senegal. Senegal, the mixed population, you can find it in the south, in Casamance or in Dakar. It's where so many cultures have come together. So the middle colonies were the most ethnically diverse British colonies in North America, with settlers coming from all parts of Europe and many as indentured servants. What does indentured servant means? It means enslaved people. It means people put in slavery. That's what we call indentured servant. Now the southern colonies. What should you know about the southern colonies? The southern colonies included Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia. If I ask you here again a question, what are the southern colonies? Tell me that the southern colonies include Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia. What is their historical name? Their historical name was, they used to be called the Colony of Dominion of Virginia, or the Province of Carolina and the Province of Georgia. Yes, that's what they used to be called. But this is not very much important. The colonies were originally chartered to compete in the race for colonies in the 15th, 16th, and 17th century. So when the southern colonies came, it was to make the list of colonies bigger. So they too joined the competition of colonies. They became a big, colony in the 16th, 17th century. So then they developed into prosperous colonies that made large profits. So they started to, like other colonies, to grow and to become big colonies. They were based on cash crops. What does cash crop mean? Cash crop means culture commerciale. And they developed tobacco, indigo, dye, and rice. Indigo, c'est le bleu. Bleu. Dye, c'est la teinte, indigo, and rice. These are the things that they developed in the southern colonies. They grow tobacco, indigo, dye, and rice. Over time, the region quickly became well known for its high slave population and highly unequal social class distribution. So you see that in the southern colonies, later on, it became very famous. It became very famous with, well known with the high population of slaves. So this means that slavery was very present in the South. Yes, because also the South was characterized by agriculture. So agriculture was there. So what next to understand? By the 18th century, the American colonies were growing rapidly, and as a result of low death rates along with huge supplies of land and food, the situation attracted a heavy flow of immigrants. What does this mean? It's different from what I explained to you at the very beginning. During the time of exploration, when the populations met, so many people died. So many people died. It's because of contamination of diseases. The population of America went down. But here, we can see that there was stability. There was a low death rates. And then the land became very attractive. All right? So the land became very attractive. So what is that? So it means more people are going to come. So in fact, it was noticeable that until this time, what you have to understand, until this time of history, the question of independence from Britain did not arise. As long as the colonies needed British military support against the French and Spanish powers. What does this mean? Until now, I am explaining to you life and rule or life and government in the colonies. I have not talked yet about independence. Okay? I have not yet talked about independence. Why? Because the colonies found that it was okay going with the British. Why? Because they needed the support of the military support of the British. They needed that. So they did not talk about independence. And now comes another thing. Now we are moving to the road to the American Revolution. The road to the American Revolution. Here you need to follow, carefully. Now we are leading to the American Revolution. And you need to know what is the American Revolution. What was the cause of the American Revolution? What major events characterized the American Revolution? This is very important, class. And I hope so far it's okay. Please post in the chat to let me know if everything is okay. If you have questions, you can post your questions in the chat. I am following at the same time the YouTube in order for me to pick your questions and answer. Now, the road to the American Revolution. I need to tell you how the American Revolution happened and what happened during the American Revolution. First, let us start with the French and Indian War. The French and Indian spread west. They came into conflict with the French, particularly in the region of the Ohio Valley. All right? So you see here, there was a war that was called the French and Indian War. And as it is said, the British colonies spread. It means there was a big expansion. The British colony were trying to go to the west to grow. So when they tried to grow to the west, they came into conflict with the French. So when they came at a certain moment, they clashed, telescopage. They clashed with the French colonies, and it was in the region of the Ohio Valley. So the governor of Virginia organized a group of citizens led by George Washington to fight the French. So then the governor of Virginia said that I'm going to organize a group, and this group is going to fight with the French. It was just a strategy to occupy more land. So it is called the French and Indian War. Why was it called the French and Indian War? The French and Indian War because Indians were helping out on both sides. What does it mean? It was a war between French and English colonies, but the Indians were sometimes helping the French and sometimes helping the British and sometimes helping, how can I say, the French. That's why it was called the French-Indian War. So this conflict is spread beyond America. Yes, it means that at this moment, this was not the only conflict in the world. There were other conflicts. So in 1757, England and France declared war each other in Europe. Here we are on the American continent. But remember that in Europe, England and France were in war. So they were enemies in Europe. So imagine that even in the American continent, they are going to be enemies. So when the British finally captured the cities of Quebec, and they attacked. Remember, I told you at the very beginning, when France came, they went to the north, they occupied Canada. But here, see that Canada is being occupied now by the British. So the British finally occupied the cities of Quebec, and Montreal in New France. And the French finally surrendered. What does surrender mean? C'est abdiquer, ou bien se livrer. When you are dominated in a war, you surrender. What does it mean? It means that the British have gone north and they have occupied some French colonies. They have taken Quebec and Montreal. So that's why today you see that Canada, it speaks two languages, English and French. Why? Because at the time of colonization, Canada was occupied first by the French. And during this war, the British went there and they occupied Quebec and Montreal. So that's how France, no, Canada became bilingual, English and French, because they were colonized by the French. And then the English came to occupy some colonies, Quebec and Montreal. So as a result of this victory over the French, the British colony of Canada was established in 1763. So as France lost this war, so the colonies grew. So the British established a colony in Canada. So it means the British have occupied some land in Canada. So the French-Indian War was an event by the political development of the colonies. So it was also part of the larger 7 Years' War. When we talk about the 7 Years' War, you simply try to understand what happened between French and the British. So the British occupied, they went to the west, and then they clashed with France. There was a conflict. They dominated France and they occupied some of the colonies of France. What else? Britain beat France, so it means they had a victorious war over French forces. And France lost its colonies, yes. France lost its colonies, territories in Canada. They lost Louisiana, and they lost Louisiana. Louisiana was in the United States, in America. They lost Louisiana, and they lost other territories like, they lost Louisiana in America, and they lost Quebec and Montreal. So this became a belonging of the British. So if I come back on this war, it means the war was won by the British. The British dominated the French, and then they occupied the land. And then France lost its sorry, please, sorry. All right? Sorry, please. Okay? Are you with me? Sorry. All right, so this means that the war was costly and Britain needed money. So Britain won the war. So the war was very costly and Britain needed money. So it is true that Britain won the war. They dominated France and they occupied some territories of France. But what was the consequence of that war? The war cost a lot of money. It cost a lot of money. And then Britain needed some money. So as they needed some money, where are they going to find that money? That is a question. So consequently, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act of 1763, imposing a tax on the colonies without going through the colonial legislatures. What does it mean? Britain had a war with France, and then they won the war, they dominated, and they occupied some French territories. But after the war, they spent a lot of money, and they needed more money. As they needed more money, they had to find the money. So how to find that money? They imposed taxes. So they passed at the British Parliament an act. It is called the Stamp Act of 1765. And this act imposed taxes to the colonies to pay. So two important consequences of this war. Look at the two important consequences of the war. The war helped unite the colonies and gave them a sense of their power. During the war, it was not a problem for the colonies because they needed protection from the British Army. But another consequence of the war is that the debt from the war let British higher British taxes, which later on made the American desire independence from the British. What does it mean? The war was victorious. It means Britain won the war, but the war cost a lot of money. And because of that, the consequence was to raise taxes. The British imposed taxes, les impôts, and they imposed them to American colonies. And the American colonies did not want to pay the taxes. So the American colonies wanted to refuse to pay the taxes. So the issue on taxes, because of the costly war, was drawn. However, the big question was, did Parliament have the right, all right, to tax Americans who were not represented in it? Here, what is the issue? The issue on taxes, everybody understood it. It's because the war costed a lot of money, and then the British Parliament imposed some taxes. But the big problem here is, does or would the American colonies accept to pay the taxes? They would not accept to pay the taxes. Do you know why? The question is, did the Parliament have the right to tax Americans who were not represented in it? Here, if I explain to you, is that how was the Parliament organized? Look, England is in Europe, and the kingdom is in Europe, and the Parliament is in Europe. So the colonies are in America, in a different continent. So it means it was a governance in distance. It's just like our university today. I am in my house doing class. All of you, you are in Dakar, in Ziguinchor, in Tamba, or wherever. And our administration is in Dakar. Imagine an administrator in Dakar trying to control everything in Senegal. So that was the same during the parliament. The British Parliament was in Europe, in London, and they wanted to impose taxes in America. And they imposed laws to their colonies in America. And the big problem here is that the colonies were not represented in the parliament. The parliament is in Europe, in England, in London. In the parliament, there was no American. And the parliament was represented in the colonies by the governor. So the governor of the colony is the one who represents the British Parliament or the British, government. So the consequences was that the colonies did not want to pay taxes. Yes, the colonies, I repeat, did not want to pay taxes. And then problems escalated. 1760s and early 1770s. And when the problem happens, so there was a kind of demonstration, manifestation. So the colonies started crying, saying taxation without representation. That's what the colonies say. Taxation without representation. What does taxation without representation mean? Taxation without representation means that it is not normal to make people pay taxes made by a parliament in which they are not represented. So this means that the colonies did not want to pay taxes to a parliament that does not respect them, in a parliament where they are not represented. And automatically there was resistance. So it means resistance was inevitable. Resistance was inevitable. And then we are going to the American Revolution. There was no negotiation because the parliament imposed taxes and the American colonies did not want to pay those taxes. And then they started saying taxation without representation. Why do they say taxation without representation? It's because They cannot pay taxes to a parliament in which they are not represented. So resistance started and the American Revolution started. So by the end of the French and Indian War, Britain had emerged as the most powerful country in the world. So here you have to understand that after the British won the French, all right, after the British won the French, England became one of the most powerful countries in the world. They became a world superpower. However, the cost of having a large army meant that Britain had to raise money. And as Britain became a world superpower, it wanted to keep its domination, its power, its superpower. And then they had to pay a lot of money to the army. And Britain did not have that money. And they wanted to make the money. So one way to do this was to force, to impose the colonies to pay taxes on imports and to the colonies. So the one strategy for Britain to get money, that was a strategy of the taxes, to impose. If I tell you what was the strategy of the taxes, the purpose, to make money because England needed money after the war to pay their army, and they wanted to force the colonies to pay taxes because of imports from tea, sugar, coffee, cloth, and wine. So the rich and powerful merchants of America, as well as the common people, did not want to pay. However, they want to have to pay British taxes. So what happened? The powerful businessmen or businesswomen in America or the merchants, they did not want to pay those taxes. They say, no, even if we are merchants, we are buying tea, sugar, coffee, cloth, and wine from them. We cannot pay these taxes. The big question, why? Because they say that they were imposed to pay the taxes by force. Britain imposed them to pay the taxes by force. And their response was taxation without representation. Taxation without representation, I repeat it, class, also means that we cannot be imposed to pay taxes in a parliament where we have no representation. It's just like you students, when today UNCHK decide to make decisions where students are not represented, you would say, no, we would not accept because the assembly of the university, we are not represented there. And they want to make decisions to impose us. You will not be happy. That's why you have delegates and you are represented in the assembly of university. So here, imagine the Parliament of Britain, there was no representation of the colonies. And the colonies said, no, no taxation without representation. We are not going to pay any tax when we are not represented. So they hate it. So it means the American colonies did not like Britain. So trying to take away their great wealth, it means it was an exploitation, taking all their goods without being represented, and they impose them taxes. So bitterness toward Britain and British soldiers in America began to grow in a group. So there were tensions, there were clashes, télescopage, des accrochages between British army and the colonialists. So what happened? Bitterness toward Britain and British soldiers in America began to grow when a group of British soldiers in Boston fired on a crowd of protesters on March the 5th, 1770. What does this mean? A group of protesters, people demonstrating, and then the British soldiers, the British army, they fired them. And when they fired these people who were protesters, that was known as the Boston Massacre. So the revolution started with problems. And one of the problems is a Boston Massacre. When I ask you what is a Boston Massacre, class, tell me that the Boston Massacre is when a group of protesters against the taxes demonstrated and the British military, the British soldiers, fired them. They massacred them. This is called the Boston Massacre. Are you with me, class? Do you understand now? So later on, in 1773, Britain passed a law called the Tea Act, and this pushed the colonies to take action to protest British control of the colonies. So later on, we are in 1770, there was the Boston Massacre. Some protesters, demonstrators wanted to say no against the taxation. They were frustrated, and some soldiers massacred them. All right? That's what we call the Boston Massacre. And the Boston Massacre happened on March 5th, 1770. So 3 years later, it was 1773. So the British passed another act called the Tea Act. So American merchants felt that the Tea Act would result in a monopoly of the East Indian Company. What does it mean? When the British passed the Tea Act, it means that for them, the British wanted to give favor to the East Indian Company to dominate the market, to sell their tea, and to be a kind of monopoly. That was not good for their business. So there was colonial opposition. So colonial opposition, it means that the colonies did not want to accept the Tea Act because the Tea Act gave domination or control of the East Indian Company. And the East Indian Company had to dominate the market. So the colonies did not want it. So the British government did not abandon its claims to the authority to pass laws for the colonies. So it means even though the colonies did not want to pay taxes, the British continued imposing taxes. And what this? Would the situation continue like this? This is a big question. Would the situation continue like this? This is a very important question. So I told you that in 1770, on March the 5th, 1770, some protesters were not happy with the act. Yes, and then they were demonstrating, and the British Army fired them, and that was a Boston Massacre. And then the British continued to impose taxes, but the American colonies wanted always to say no. Now remember, class, I told you that in 1770 there was a Boston Massacre. So it means some protesters were massacred by the British Army. What is going to happen? A reaction, a response to the Boston Massacre. Why? Because some protesters were massacred by the British Army. And then the colonies are going to respond, to react against the Boston Massacre. Let me explain to you how this happened. In response to the violence of the Boston Massacre of 1770, and new taxes like the Tea Act in 1773, a group of frustrated colonists disguised as Indians protested taxation without representation, throwing 342 chests of bags into the ocean and the harbor. What does this mean? In reaction or in response to the Boston Massacre, because some patriots have been massacred by the army, another group of frustrated colonists, it means inhabitants in the colonies, they disguise in Indians, ils se sont déguisés comme des Indiens, to look like Indians. And then they protested. They went to the harbor, sur le quai, to the port, and they took bags of tea, and they were throwing the bags of tea in the water, into the ocean. All right? It's just like when the students are frustrated, they get into the university, they go to the administration, taking documents and throwing them. So this group of frustrated patriots, they wanted to respond to the Boston Massacre. They went to the harbor, that was in 1773, tea, throwing them, saying taxation without representation, taxation without representation. So this event, it means this reaction to the Boston Massacre. This response to the Boston Massacre, this event is called the Boston Tea Party. So class, when I ask you what is a Boston Tea Party, the Boston Tea Party is a demonstration in which protesters wanted to respond to the taxation and also to respond to the violence of the Boston Massacre, because some protesters were massacred because of these taxes. They don't like the taxes and they are not happy with the Boston Massacre. So they responded. They went to the port, they picked some bags of tea and they threw them into the water. That is called the famous Boston Tea Party. Then there were more British control. I hope class you understand. Yes, Sire Baji, you said you don't understand the Boston Massacre. The Boston Massacre, I say, is that the Boston Massacre is that some protesters, okay, I'm going to speak slowly. Sire Baji, the Boston Massacre means that some protesters, it was on March the 5th, 1770, because the British Parliament imposed some taxes and the colonies did not want to pay the taxes. The problem is that why did Britain impose the taxes? Because Britain, after winning the war over France, needed some money. They spent a lot of money. And they wanted to create that money. And that money had to come from taxes. It's just like today in Senegal, when there is no money, they say we are going to increase taxes. Teachers, professors, businessmen are going to pay more taxes. Would you accept? No, no. The same situation. So they wanted to impose taxes, and the British colonies, the American colonies, the inhabitants of the colonies did not want to pay those taxes. And they started saying taxation without representation. And as a way of demonstration, it means manifestation, some protesters went to say taxation without representation. We are not happy with that. And during their demonstration, the British Army fired them. Ils ont tiré sur eux. It's just like students when you are demonstrating, remember Farlusen and the others. The policemen fired and they killed somebody. And then the British Army fired. That's what we call the Boston Massacre. So in response to the Boston Massacre, the colonies were frustrated. They organized other demonstrations. They went in 1773, 3 years later, to the harbor of Boston, and they picked, there were a lot of tea, companies bringing tea. They picked all the bags of tea and they were throwing them into the water to destroy the tea. That is the significance of the Boston Tea Party. The significance of the Boston Tea Party is to react against the taxes and also to show their frustration against the Boston Massacre. Is it clear now, class? I hope now it is clear, class. Is it clear now, class? Is it okay now, class? So the colonies continue to struggle and to coordinate their resistance to new measures. All right? So the colonies said that the resistance was okay, and they had to continue to struggle to coordinate their resistance to new measures. So between 1766 and 1774, they had a lot of correspondences, communication. They exchanged ideas, information, and how to resist. So after that, the colony said that we are going to resist. We are going to resist. We are going to find more sophisticated ways of building a resistance, because now what they want is to go for their independence. We are now in the mid of the American Revolution. All right? Now we are in the mid of the American Revolution. The American Revolution has started. People want to get their independence. All right? So between 1766 and 1774, they had a lot of correspondences. So I mean, in these correspondences, they communicated, they exchanged. And what is going to happen? The First Continental Congress. Plus, you need to familiarize with the First Continental Congress. What is the First Continental Congress? The First Continental Congress has to happen. It means it is the first time that the Continental Congress has met. So the Continental Congress on September the 5th, 1774, it means 1 year after the Boston Massacre, delegates from each of the 13 colonies, except Georgia, met in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress to organize colonial resistance to Parliament Coercive Act. If I ask you what is the objective of the Continental Congress, the Continental Congress was the first meeting of the colonies. So the colonies said everybody has to meet in Philadelphia. They sent delegates, and the delegates came to Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. Okay? And when they came, the thing was to organize a colonial resistance. So the objective of the Continental Congress was to unite and to resist against the British taxes. All the states came, but Georgia did not come. You will ask me a question, why didn't Georgia come? Georgia did not come because it was fighting a Native American uprising. And Georgia at that time needed the protection and the support of the British military. So it was strategic. It was a strategy. Georgia could not participate because Georgia is still dependent on British protection. It is still dependent on the protection of the British military. So a number of leaders, a number of great leaders marked the delegates, such among them John Adams of Massachusetts. If I ask you to give me names of people who marked, the American Revolution, you have the Continental Congress, you have John Adams from Massachusetts, you have George Washington of Virginia, and diplomat John Jay from New York. There were so many people, but these three are among the most known, famous leaders who influenced the American Revolution. The American Revolution. At the First Continental Congress, you had John Adams of Massachusetts, you have George Washington of Virginia, and diplomat John Jay from New York. So after interesting debates, the Congress issued a Declaration of Right. So it means after they discuss, it's just like the student. When you meet for a strike, you don't come automatically and you declare a strike. No, you write like a document, a memorandum. You say all your frustrations. So when the delegates came, they had interesting debates, and the Congress issued a Delegation of Rights. What does it mean, a Declaration of Rights? They wrote a declaration where they tell their rights, what are their rights as a colony. And the declaration, the British colonies, they express their loyalty to British Crown. It means they recognize that they are ruled by the British Crown. That's not a problem. But they are frustrated with the parliaments taxing them illegally. You get my point, class? It means in the Declaration of Rights, they wanted to show to the British, parliament that they recognize that they are ruled by the British, but also they mention their frustration, okay? Their frustration. They are not happy to be imposed taxes. So the Congress passed the Articles of Association. So the Congress passed the Articles of Association. What does it mean? The Articles of Association called the colonies to stop importing goods from British. So the Articles of Association called the colonies to boycott, not to take goods from the British Isles from December 1st, 1774, if the coercive acts were not repealed. What does it mean? The Articles of Association by the Continental Congress, they said to the colonies from December 1st, 1774, do not buy any good from the British if they don't stop the taxes. So the Congress declared that if Britain failed to address the colonialist grievance in a timely manner, they would convene another meeting on May 10th, 1775. What does it mean? This was just a warning, c'était juste un avertissement. The First Continental Congress has taken place and they have taken some act. What did they do in the First Continental forces? They organized themselves. They wrote a declaration of rights to tell the British that they recognize they are governed by the British. But they showed their frustration against the taxes. And they asked the British in the Articles of Association to stop this. If they don't stop, they would boycott buying goods from the British. And they said one last thing. If the British insist, the British do not stop. You know, they organized the First Continental Congress. They are going to organize a Second Continental Congress. And when they organize a Second Continental Congress, they will now make a decision. Things will become more complicated. So we are going to the American Revolutionary War. The First Continental Congress expressed only a resistance. If I explain to you, class, the First Continental Congress expressed only, a mobilization of forces. And it showed some declarations of right. It shows frustration. It organized their resistance to tell colonies to boycott, not to buy goods from the British, and to say no to the taxes. That was the main objective of the First Continental Congress. But they said as an ultimatum, if the British insist, if the British do not stop, they would organize a Second Continental Congress. And when they organize a Second Continental Congress, this one is going to be a war. First, I repeat, it started with the American Revolution. Now we are going to the Revolutionary War. Now the war for independence is going to start. Now they don't negotiate. They are ready to go for a war. They negotiated. They said everything. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. So they are going to a revolutionary war. Are you with me, class? Is it okay, class? So now we're moving to the American Revolution. And look, when did the American Revolution happen? The American Revolution happened between 1775 and 83. So as compromise, what happens? The American colonies already said to the British Parliament that if they don't respect their rights, they are going to organize another Continental Congress. So now we are going to the American Revolutionary War. And the American Revolutionary War started from 1775. So as promised, it means nothing changed. The situation was the same, and Congress organized another meeting in Philadelphia. So when they organized another meeting, that meeting was the Second Continental Congress. And the Second Continental Congress happened on May the 10th, 1775. And then the American Revolution or the American Revolutionary War had already begun. All right, class? So here, what do I mean by this? I said that the British were informed. The colonies told them, if you don't stop, we are going to boycott buying goods from you. If you don't stop, we are going to a further degree. We are going to organize another meeting, and that meeting will be the Second Continental Congress. And when they organize the Second Continental Congress, that will be a war. So the First Continental Congress insisted only on mobilization, organizing their resistance, calling colonies to join and to resist, to say no. But nothing changed, and they organized now the Second Continental Congress. And now here we are in the Second Continental Congress. And the Second Continental Congress, you will see, is going to be a war. So already the American Revolutionary War started. The Revolutionary War was an insurrection, okay, by American patriots in the 13 colonies to British rule, resulting in American independence. So here, what does it mean? Many people refer to the American Revolution as the American Revolutionary War, la guerre d'indépendance. So here, all their objective was to have a war now. They are going to have a war against the British to get their independence. Also known as the American Revolution, tensions between residents of Great Britain's 13 colonies in America and the colonial government which represent the British Crown. What does this mean? This means that this revolution is going to be an action, a resistance between the colonies and the British Parliament. So on April 19, 1775, there was a clash, accrochage, between the British Army and some colonial patriots who no longer recognized the authority of the royal government of Massachusetts. Okay, what does it mean? On April 1975, a group of patriots, American patriots, they wanted to challenge, to reject the authority of the British Army. So what happened? They united and they created a united colonial fighting force, the Continental Army. What does it mean? It means that during the Second Continental Congress, the colonies organized themselves and they created something very important. They united their forces. They created a colonial fighting force. They had no army. But during the Continental Congress, they decided now to create their own army. They are going to have an army like the British because they are going for a war. So the war is inevitable. The Continental Congress now has created the army. The colonies have founded their army. It is going to be a rebellion. They are going to fight with the British. And on June 14, 1775, a month after the Continental Congress, the next day, they designated George Washington as a new Army's commander-in-chief. You know George Washington. George Washington is a general in the army. George Washington was a military. And George Washington now is going to be the chief of the Continental Army. He is going to lead the forces. George Washington is ready to go for a mission for independence. They are going to fight. They are going to fight the British. Now the colonies are ready. They have created their army. Are you with me, class? Is it clear now? I repeat, the Second Continental Congress was to move to a higher step, to make a decision. They are frustrated. They created a group of united forces, a colonial army. For their own resistance, they have created their own army. They have nominated George Washington to be the chief commander of the army. And now they are ready for a war. So in July 1775, Congress issued a declaration of the causes of necessity of taking arms. What does it mean? Here, the Congress showed why they needed to take arms. Now they have an army. They are going to react, to resist. They have written a declaration to show the causes, the reasons, the motivation why they have the necessity to take arms. They are going to justify themselves. It's just like when students are frustrated, you send a letter to the president of the university to say why we are going on a strike, because we are not happy with teachers. We have no computers. We have no internet. And before going to the war, the Congress issued a declaration of causes of necessity of taking arms. Because you have to know that they are still controlled by the British. So they need to justify their acts. And they say they are going to say in the declaration of causes of necessity to take arms, why they want to take arms. And they said, this declaration, the declaration was written by John Dickinson of Pennsylvania. And John Dickinson was a veteran. John Dickinson participated in the First Continental Congress. So the First Continental Congress was a big step. And the Second Continental Congress was successful because in the Second Continental Congress, the colonies organized their own army. They have an army. This army is ready to fight. And the declaration to take arms, La Déclaration de prise d'armes, it was written by John Dickinson of Pennsylvania. It was just to give a justification why they are going to take arms. It's just like you, class. Students, when you are not happy, you go on strike, you send me a letter or a letter to the department, to the boss of the university. We are going on strike because we don't have internet, we don't have books, we don't have good courses, we don't have this and we don't have that. And now we have the right to go on strike. And that's what they did. We need this, we need this, we need our rights. We don't have them. We have the right to take arms and defend ourselves. And the Continental Congress is going to defend themselves. Now, for over Congress supervised a war against the country to which it proclaimed loyalty. So it means that they were loyal to the British. They recognized that the British governed them, but now they are going to fight their mother, their political mother. So the kids, the new colonies were kids, the babies of the British Parliament. Now the babies are going to fight against their political mother. So as early as 1776, what happened? A number of factors began to strengthen the call for separation. All right? So it means some writers started supporting the revolution. A writer like Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine wrote a nice pamphlet, a good pamphlet. It is called The Common Sense. And in The Common Sense, Thomas Paine was explaining to people why it was important and legal and legitimate for them to go and take arms and register to the army. So at the same time, many Americans came to realize that their military might not be capable of defeating the British Empire on its own. What was the problem? Some Americans started doubting, saying, be careful. The army of the British Empire is very big. They are today the world's biggest superpower, the biggest army in the world. They started doubting, thinking that their army could not or will not be able to resist or to win the British. So independence would allow it to form alliances with Britain. Powerful rivals, France was the forefront of everyone's mind. So they started doubting, saying that their army could not be as strong as the British army. So what was the solution? They started thinking about solutions. It's just like you, class. When one university is on strike, Chess or Bombay or St. Louis, they are dominated by the policemen or whatever. What do? You sometimes try to provoke and call Dakar, Ziguinchor, the others to come and join you in the fight. So when they realized that their army could not be strong enough to fight against the British, their strategy was to try to influence the enemies of Britain and come and join them. Remember that England won France. England beat France in the French-Indian War, and they occupied some French territories. So it means England and France at this moment are enemies. What should I do? I should go and take your enemy as a friend. If I take your enemy as a friend, I become your enemy. The friend of your enemy is your enemy. So the British Army, now the Continental Army, tried to have collaboration with the French. So the French are going to support them and help them, organize the war. Is that clear, class? So the war itself became hostile. So there was hostility. There was frustration. So there were clashes. There were tensions between Britain and the American colonies. All right. So in the spring of 1776, so the provisional colonial government began to send new instructions to their congressional delegates, obliquely or indirectly allowing them to vote for independence. So as early as the spring of 1776, so the colonies started, they have their local governance. For example, if you talk about the colony of Massachusetts, they have their own local government. They were kind of independent colonies. So the colony of Virginia, the colony of New York, of New Jersey, they started saying, at your level, please vote for independence. Say that you are going to vote for your independence. If you all vote for your independence, we have the majority of colonies, and the British would understand that we don't want them to be here. Please vote. All right. So the provisional government of Virginia. So it means the state of Virginia had already prepared everything. So they wanted to submit, their proposal. The provisional government of Virginia went further. It instructed its delegation to submit a proposal for independence before Congress. So the colony of Virginia was very well organized, and the colony of Virginia proposed, a proposal for to influence people to go to Congress and say, we are going today to vote for independence. And when they vote for independence, they are going to take their independence from Britain. And on June the 7th, Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee. So it means that Richard Henry Lee was the delegate of Virginia. So he respected his instruction. But what happened? Congress did not confirm the vote. Congress postponed, is on reporté, the final vote on the proposal until July the 1st. So they waited until July the 1st to take their vote. So what did they do? On July the 1st, they organized themselves. They organized themselves how? Now they created a committee first. A committee to draft a provisional declaration of independence. For you should be the proposal passed. So when they came on July the 1st, what did they do, class? They proposed a committee. They created a committee. So this committee is going to be composed of 5 men, and these 5 men are going to write a document. This document is going to be called the Declaration for Independence. The Declaration of Independence. So the Declaration of Independence on July the 1st, they first appointed a committee, and the committee to draft it, c'est rédiger, to draft the Declaration of Independence. The committee was composed of 5 men, and among them you have John Adams, and you have Benjamin Franklin. But the declaration was primarily the work of one man, Thomas Jefferson. There was a committee of 5 men, among whom you have John Adams, you have Benjamin Franklin, you have Thomas Jefferson and others. But understand that Thomas Jefferson was a major author. Thomas Jefferson is considered to be the author of the Declaration of Independence, because it is Thomas Jefferson who did almost the job. So the Continental Congress made several revisions. So when Jefferson finished, Jefferson proposed a draft, un brouillon. And then the other members started bringing corrections and revisions. So they started looking at the declaration and say what they want to be in the declaration and what they do not want to be in the declaration. Are you with me, class? Is it clear? Are you with me, class? Okay, so, all right, so I repeat. Now we are on July the 1st, 1776. July the 1st, 1776, a committee is created, and the committee is composed of 5 men, among whom John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson. So they are going to write the Declaration of Independence. And you know what is a Declaration of Independence? It is to declare independence. All these people contributed, they played a role, but understand that Thomas Jefferson is the main author of the Declaration of Independence. And when Thomas Jefferson finished, he submitted the document and people started to discuss. Okay, they made some modifications. And on July the 4th, Congress voted to approve the Declaration of Independence. What does it mean? That's why July the 4th marks the independence of America. Why? Because on July the 4th, this Declaration of Independence written by Thomas Jefferson is already accepted. So class, remember, if I told you who wrote the Declaration of Independence, it is Thomas Jefferson. So as Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence is a political document that upholds the sovereignty of America as a state. And then it defended, it said the Declaration of Independence is divided into 5 sections. If you take the Declaration of Independence, you find 5 sections. You will find an introduction, you will find a preamble, you will find a body divided in 2 sections in a conclusion. So when you see this in all this, you find in clear terms how the founders, it means the founding fathers, and now I use the term founding fathers, les pères fondateurs de la nation, the founding fathers, they wanted to express their grievances, leurs doléances. And they said in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence includes a famous passage. You read one important passage in the Declaration of Independence. What is that? It says, we hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Those among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, government are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Unquote. What does this mean? It means that Americans are ready now to take their independence. Americans are ready now to take by force their independence. And they have already written their Declaration of Independence. And they have signed their Declaration on Independence. Now, class, we are, okay, it's clear, but quick. Yes, I'm going to speak slowly. Yes, I'm going to speak slowly. No worry. Okay, now we are on July the 4th, 1776. July the 4th, 1776. What is going to happen? The founders have written the Declaration of Independence, and now they are ready. They have pronounced why they want their sovereignty. And the Declaration of Independence is now signed it means that officially America is free. The 13 colonies have taken their independence. It is on July the 4th. That's why today America celebrates its independence on July the 4th, 1776. And what is the impact of the Declaration of Independence? What is the importance of the Declaration of Independence? Please, class, listen to me. The Declaration of Independence is important. It's because no American document has a greater global impact than the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, because of this, the Declaration of Independence has been fundamental to American history, longer than any other text. Why? The Declaration of Independence is a very important document in American history because the Declaration of Independence is the first document to use the name United States of America. Please, class, listen to me. The name United States of America is first time used in the Declaration of Independence. We are in 1776. I told you at the beginning not to talk about USA. Drafted, rédiger. Drafted means rédiger. To draft means rédiger en français. Écrire, rédiger. Drafted, c'est rédiger. So the Declaration of Independence, I repeat, class, is the first document to use the name United States of America. Why? Because look at the name, Declaration of Independence. Now you can forget about New England, you can forget about America. The new nation has a name. It's just like in Senegal, when baby is born today is Tuesday. We wait in some tradition until next Tuesday. What do? There is a naming ceremony. People find a name to the baby. Americans have declared their independence through the Declaration of Independence. And the Declaration of Independence is the first document to use the name United States of America. Now, class, you can use the name USA. Now, it has given the country a name. And so, this is the reason why we say many people defend that the Declaration of Independence is a political birth certificate of the American nation. I repeat again, the Declaration of Independence is the political birth certificate of the American nation. Any baby in the world has a birth certificate. In a birth certificate, what do people do? They give you a name and they say your name is Amadou or Malik or Josephine or Elizabeth. So the Declaration of Independence, I repeat, is the first document to mention America, United States of America. So the name is given. That's why people consider that the Declaration of Independence is a political birth certificate of the American nation. A new nation is born now, and the new nation has a name. It is called United States of America. I hope you understand now, class. I'm almost done. In 5 minutes, I'm done. Chapter 2 is going to end in 5 minutes. I hope it's clear, class. Where's your now? Why it is called the political birth certificate of America? It's because it is the first document to mention it. It's because the Declaration of Independence is a political claim. C'est une réclamation politique. It's because the Declaration of Independence mentions its name. Now it has given to the new nation a name. So it's just like you, when you are born as a baby, people give you a name in your birth certificate, leur extrait de naissance. So the Declaration of Independence could be defined as a political birth certificate of the American nation. So it is the first successful Declaration of Independence in world history. That's why today America is referred to as a big democracy. America is referred to as a big nation because the Declaration of Independence has influenced many other, revolutions in the world. Now you see the conclusion of the American Revolution. The American Revolution is a revolution for war. The American Revolution is a war for independence. It is a war for independence. Now the war is here. They have got the result. They have the victory. So the Continental Congress has got a big victory. They have dominated the British. They have their political sovereignty. And now you are going to have a map of America. Look, you are going to have now a kind of map, the 13 American colonies. We are on July 1776. The 13 colonies are free, and they are the list I gave you: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and you continue. All of them now have become a nation. And this nation is going, it's now 50 states, but in 1776, it was only 13 states. And the nation is going to begin. Here are the free 13 colonies. They are going to be the colonies of the United States. So when we talk about the birth of the new nation, the nation that was born and that was called United States of America were composed at the beginning of 13 colonies, and the 13 colonies became independent. It became 13 free states in 1776 after independence. So the victory of the war for independence, or the victory for the American Revolution, is they have got their independence and they have given a name to their nation. Now you can call them United States of America. This is the end of chapter 1. Thank you for your attention. I hope all was clear. I hope everything was okay. This is the end of chapter 2. So go and take the recordings and listen again. So soon you are going to have your control continue. So I'm going to evaluate you on the basis of chapter 1 and chapter 2. Take my 2 lectures and read and do all the tests. Go and do test de connaissance. You are going to be ready for your exam. It's not going to be very complicated. So get ready. I hope it is very helpful. So if you can post some questions, I can pick some and try to answer in 5 minutes. I hope, class, it was nice. This is the end of the lecture. So I hope it was very helpful for you. Thank you for your attention. And I trust it will be helpful for you. So please go back to the lecture, follow it and read again, and go back to the course and take all your exercises and do them and get ready. I wish you best of luck. Thank you for today. Thank you and have a good time. Thank you, class.